We're back with the same project, but with a different purpose. The purpose of this video is to answer this question that says the package size is only 35 megabytes, but it's running very poorly in lower end devices. So this is regarding to the video that we made how to make and publish a game in 32 and 64 bits in Google Play Store. So to answer that question, we're gonna have to take another deep dive into Unity optimization. So since the last time that we tried to optimize our game, the profiler didn't work very properly. This time it does. What we're gonna need from the profiler is to read our CPU usage, our GPU usage, and the UI. So these others are not very relevant, so you might as well just untick them. Okay, so now what we got is the CPU, GPU, memory, and the UI. The UI is not that important, so we're gonna keep an eye on the memory and the CPU usage, since we're targeting the very low performance devices. So we're gonna put that to the side, and what we're gonna do is take a quick test in the game that is running right now. Before we go any further, what you're gonna have to make sure is that you have free space in your memory. So as of for right now, I have around 2.5 gigabytes available, which is more than enough for the Unity to run smoothly. Okay, so let's just hit play, and before we play the game, what we want is a fixed aspect ratio. So I'm just gonna put in 1920 by 1080 at the landscape, and I'm gonna disable VSync. The profiler is recording, and now we can play the game. Okay, that's enough to get a reading. Now let's see what we have in here. The UI records 10,000 frames a second. So the UI is more than optimized. We don't have to worry about the UI anymore. So what we have in here is the CPU usage, which records 60 FPS. That is very not good. And also the GPU usage records a 200 FPS. That is slightly better. The memory, well, the memory is kind of hard to read since we're using so many things at once. So we're gonna focus mainly on the CPU usage. Going back to the basics, these spikes are, by the way, the editor loop. These will go away once you build the app, so you won't have these spikes. So going back to the basics, what makes the CPU usage so high? Well, obviously one of them is the quality. Right now I'm running at ultra settings, at everything turned at the highest. So obviously if you're building for Android devices, you're gonna have to turn everything into very low. If you turn everything into very low settings, what you're gonna have is no shadows, and everything will look not as clear as it should be. So the textures are not loading at the 4K resolution that they're intended to. They're running very low. You can see that the tarmac is very distorted, and that is not a very huge concern since this is going to be played in a very small screen, so you're not gonna see all this detail, and that is a good thing. So just by decreasing that alone, giving it another test. Alright, so these are the readings for the play that we just made, and now we can't see the other readings that we did earlier. So what we're gonna do is go into our preferences, into profiler, and we're gonna change this frame count. So we're gonna do like 1000. And now what we got is the reading from the graphics turned at the lowest. I'm gonna set them back up to ultra just so we can get a reading into our profiler. Now we got a reading. So this is the reading at the graphics turned at the very lowest, and this other thing is the graphics turned at the highest. We can see a immediate difference, and again these spikes will go away once you build the actual game. So you can see the memory is behaving very differently as soon as we turn up the graphic settings. So what we have in here is a very slight optimization, which is not ideal if we're building a game that is targeting mobile devices. Now the main issue for that is that this scene uses, okay, let me show you how many terrain systems this scene uses. This scene uses all these terrains, which we can barely fit into one screen, and that is not what you want into a game that is targeting mobile devices. If we go into the orthographic view, what we can see is a full scale of this whole entire map, so you can see how how huge the map is. Now obviously if you played racing games such as Asphalt 8 or I guess any other game, you're gonna see that the maps are very small. They're not this huge map, and almost none of the games that I played are open world games, and that is purely because it can't handle all this terrain into that small CPU. So obviously we have a workaround for that. Into the beginning where you build this game, you obviously need the occlusion culling, but even with the occlusion culling, you're not gonna be able to fit this game into that 1 GB RAM device. So what you're gonna have to do, we're gonna be forced to do, is to change the whole entire map. So luckily for that, we've done that. We have, okay, let's save that. We have this map called Super Mario Map, and if we zoom out of this map, this whole entire map, what you're gonna see is a very small map. Now this map will run in basically any device that you throw in. It's so small, it's so light, it's basically perfect for any device. So what we're gonna do is get our readings back. Okay, get our profiler back, and this is the readings that we got from the other map. So we're gonna put that to the side, and now what we're gonna do is just hit play on this map. Okay, so now I'm inside the game and I'm just gonna hit this pause button so we can play. And obviously the game runs at the 1080p resolution without the G-Sync. Okay, now let's take a look at the profiler. We can see that the profiler is so much better that it's almost feeling like it's a different game. We're still recording 200 FPS, but the line that is underneath is so small that is almost non-existent. The CPU usage has gone down so much. It's such a huge difference. Okay, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna change this back to 300 so we can get a closer look at how the CPU is performing. If we were to not have these spikes, this would read even lower. This would probably read like 100 or 200 frames a second. Luckily for us, we can check that without using this profiler. So don't forget to hit this record if you don't want to record anymore. And now I'm gonna maximize this and I'm gonna use this stats. So what this stats allows you to do is to check this milliseconds. So obviously I have a computer, not a low-end device, 700 frames a second, but that is just to test that our game can run very smoothly. So 1 millisecond all the way up to 5 milliseconds is acceptable for very low end devices. So this game now should run very smoothly in basically any device. Now this scene has graphics turned into ultra. If we turn them back into very low, we can get a even better reading. So now instead of 700, now we're running at 800 frames a second at 1.2 milliseconds. So one thing to keep in mind if our project is targeting very low end devices is the vertices count or the polygonal count. So these polygons take up memory space or RAM space. If we have too many of those, obviously our frame rate will go down. So to prove that, what I'm gonna get is a AMG, this Jeep that has a lot of vertices. As we can see, it has 500,000 vertices, and I'm gonna get like 4 of those. First of all, I'm just going to remove the controller so we can just test it, and I'm gonna duplicate that, move it, and I'm gonna get 1 more. Now our scene has 1.5 million vertices. If we go ahead and play the game, if we remember, the frame rate was at 800 FPS. Now our frame rate records 300 FPS at 2.6 milliseconds. So what I want to say by that, if you use these high polygonal shapes or vehicles, it is obviously going to make your game run slower. So a fix for that issue or the vertices issue is to maybe remove the whole entire interior and then paint the windows black, since you can't really see the interior if you're playing in mobile device, since the screen is very small. That would drastically decrease this vertices count into a very low number, and then you can make this game very playable. So I hope you learned something in this tutorial. I know it's not very in-depth tutorial, but I'll try to explain the points into other videos. So make sure to comment down below what your main issue is into game design, and I'll try to answer it. And thank you for watching.